So welcome everybody. It's really delightful to see everyone tonight. I know a number of you, and so it's really a pleasure to see some familiar faces and some new faces. And I'm just glad that we're able to have this chance to be together during this strange quarantine time to talk about poetry and to engage in a little writing together that I hope will be delightful and nourishing to you in wherever you happen to be. I know a lot of you are in Boulder or in the surrounding area where I am, but I think a few of you might actually be pretty far afield. So it's also nice to have a diversity in our geographical locations. So welcome wherever you happen to be. So for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Radha Marcum. I'm a poet here in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm the author of Bloodline, which was awarded the New Mexico Book Award in 2018. And I teach here in Colorado through the Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver and Louisville. And of course, now the classes that they offer are all online. So you really don't have to even be in Colorado to take their wonderful classes. So I encourage you to check out Lighthouse Writers Workshop if you're interested. And I also teach poetry to small groups independently, mostly here in Colorado and Boulder. So I think at least a few of you were on the last class that I offered through the Boulder Public Library. This is an all levels class, so if you've had some experience with poetry, that's fantastic. If you have not had any experience with poetry, this class is absolutely for you. Tonight I'm going to guide you through the process of writing a poem, and we're going to look at some ideas about the practice of poetry and what it can offer to us in during quarantine. So, and we'll also read some poems for inspiration. So, you know, I like to work with sort of a dual-pronged approach where we look at some lovely poems from across centuries and across different types of poets, but that all sort of get at a similar theme or technique. So I'll be sharing some of those with you. And just to make sure, can you all see the slides okay? And can you hear the volume on my voice is good? Okay, great. So really quickly, before we get into our class, just a few housekeeping items. So this event is being recorded and it's going to be available through the Boulder Public Library, their YouTube channel. So you can look for it there after today. All of the library's online events are an extension of library services. So they like me to tell you that the library conduct policies apply to our online space as well. The library recommends you follow internet safety and privacy guidelines. And this event is part of their Summer of Discovery, as you saw on the first slide. And it's their annual celebration of reading and virtual programs for kids, teens, and adults. And if you're interested in learning more about the programs offered this summer, you can go to boulderlibrary.org/summer to learn more. I'd like to thank the Boulder Library Foundation for its generous sponsorship of this workshop. And any questions before we get started? Great. So let's dive in. So I like to start class with a bit of a warm up just to get you thinking in terms of, you know, warming up your poetic brain, as I like to say. So these are very simple exercises. There's no right or wrong way to do them. A lot of times I ask students to, you know, recall something in the near past. So in this case, I'd love for you to just jot down something you observed in nature recently. So, and this could be something very, very simple. It doesn't have to be anything, you know, awe-inspiring or complex. You know, just noticing a dandelion growing up through the cracks of the sidewalk, or a particular bird that visited your yard, or the way trees or the cottonwoods here are releasing a lot of their seeds into the air. Try to put yourself back into that memory of noticing something in nature, and I want you to describe it in as many details as you can. And try to include some sensory details other than sight. You know, I don't know if you're like me and like many of the writers I know, we tend to jump into the sense of sight really quickly and easily. So it may take a little bit more effort to access the memory of the sound or the smell, touch, or taste of that moment. But if you can, add those in. And you know, we're not trying to write a poem at this point, so just jotting down fragments. It could be a list of things, no complete sentences, and definitely try not to do any kind of analysis or you know, storytelling. Just sort of focus on the descriptive elements of that experience. So we'll take 5 minutes to do this quick exercise. All right, has everyone got a little something written down? Fantastic. So let's move on. So the theme of today's class is finding poetry in the ordinary. So of course we're all, most of us are confined or have been confined to the same space for quite some time now, 3.5 months. It's astounding. It feels more like 3 years to me at this point. Um, and, if you're like me, maybe you've taken a few forays out there to go camping or, maybe taken a few drives around, but nevertheless, we're coming back to, the same spaces day after day. But I think that through poetry and through writing, we can really make a practice of noticing and appreciating some of the very ordinary moments that happen, literally every day when you step out your door to walk your dog or watch, the birds out the window or just start noticing things in your environment. So, I think it's important to say a little bit about why poetry and why poetry right now. So, how does the practice of poetry help us cultivate resilience? And I think, you'll have your own answer to these two questions, your own answers, I should say. But, for me, the baseline is that poetry really is a strong practice that develops empathy. It offers us connectivity, across centuries, across different political spectrums, different countries. It connects us to a sense of beauty and delight and wonder. And these are all things that really we could use a lot more of in our lives now, and I think always. I think that the practice of poetry, what I've observed for myself and for many of my students and peers, the practice of poetry really helps us to access our inner resources. You could call it inner wisdom if you want to, but on a scientific level, my theory is that it really connects us to the 90% of the brain that we don't consciously use, like many other art forms. Music and dance and art and theater also have this quality of connecting us to the unconscious, if you want to call it, but I think there's a lot of intelligence there. So that's, I think, a little bit about what poetry can offer us during these times. So I'd like for us to read together some poetry, just to start the poetic juices turning before we dive into writing a poem together. And I want to recommend this book to any of you who don't already have a lively collection of poetry in your home library. This book, A Book of Luminous Things, it's an international anthology that was put together by a poet named Czesław Miłosz. He is a Nobel Prize-winning poet who came from Poland and survived the world wars there and ended up emigrating here to the U.S. And this collection of poetry really spans millennia and centuries and many different countries, and is very accessible and just a lovely collection to have on hand. So a lot of the poems I'm going to share with you today are from this book, and others that are noted in the notes on each slide. But I'd like to start with this poem by Robert Creely, who some of you may know. I believe he taught at Naropa here in Boulder. And just a very simple poem about, really not much of a long time period, just really this moment. So I'll go ahead and read this. So, like they say, underneath the tree on some soft grass I sat. I watched two happy woodpeckers be disturbed by my presence. And why not, I thought to myself, why not? So, I think for a lot of folks, poetry can be somewhat intimidating. A lot of poems aren't as simple as this. They they tend to challenge challenge us to go places and to you know, think new things and juxtapose a lot together. But you know, this is a very successful poem and very simple. And so you can see it doesn't take much to start to access that space of the magic of poetry. Denise Levertov, a wonderful poet, very, you know, somewhat of a feminist poet from the 60s and 70s. She writes in this fairly simple poem called Living. The fire in leaf and grass, so green it seems each summer the last summer. The wind blowing, the leaves shivering in the sun, each day the last day. A red salamander, so cold and so easy to catch, dreamily moves his delicate feet and long tail. I hold my hand open for him to go, each minute the last minute. So she's taken some moments, you know, from nature, from her experience, and tied them to this sense of passing time. So she opens it up a little bit more than from just the simple experience there. But nevertheless, it's very grounded in this this sense of her experience in nature. This little poem I love by a poet named Liesl Muller. A grackle observed. Watching the black grackle come out of the gray shade into the sun, I am dazzled by an unsuspected sheen, yellow, purple, and green. The comb of light silkens unspectacular wings, until he, unaware of what he needs at this one peculiar angle of sun, hops back to his modest dark and leaves the shining part of himself behind, as though brightness must outgrow its fluttering worldly dress, and enter the mind outright as vision, as pure light. So I'm going to open it up for a minute and allow you all to make some response to these poems, and maybe say a little bit about what you're seeing in each of these poems. And just go ahead and unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. There's no formal protocol.
I could say something. I'm kind of curious about just the particular uniqueness of any person's kind of sensual engagement with their environment, and noticing the differences of the three, but there's something about the body or the senses, like being perceived through the body, that I get really interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all three have a sensory experience that is expressed with the poem, and yet it's totally uniquely expressed right through their own lens.
One thing that jumped out at me was in the Creely poem, there's a really kind of daring line break there where he breaks disturbed across lines and across stanzas too. So I was interested in that. And then also there was something in the Levertov poem too, where there are some interesting line break choices there, I noticed.
Yeah, how do they change your experience of the poem?
Well, I think breaking disturbed that hard or that dramatically, it disturbs the rhythm of the poem, and so it seems effective.
Right, it's mimicking the form is mimicking the contents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah.
Something I noticed about the one that we just read, it kind of leaves some room for interpretation. It's not like 100% clear what it's even really describing.
So how do you interpret it?
Conjures up, for me, like it conjures up more than one image. Like I can see, you know, a bird or someone going through a transformation, maybe. But yeah,
Great.
multiple,
Yeah. So
multiple
yeah, say that last part again.
multiple avenues for interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's great to see in such simple poems and you know, sort of uncomplicated subject matters, this ability of poetry to suggest so many things beyond what's just simply observed. So this is going to come back. I'm so glad that you brought that point up. That's going to come back in a little bit when we read some other poems and also when we work on our own poems. So, you know, this statement, you made the perfect segue into this statement by a poet that I love named Patty Ann Rogers, and she works very much from the natural world. Brilliant poet. I encourage you to check out her work. She's written a book called The Dream of the Marshran, which is a little bit about her philosophy on how she works. And she says, often the subject of a poem is not only what it appears ostensibly to be, so in that case, a grackle. By addressing directly a specific subject or object, the poem can also address something else, something that might be difficult to address otherwise because of the limitations and clumsiness of our language. This is a form of metaphor, and in my opinion, it is the strongest tool available to a poet. So, you know, I think that we can really overthink this aspect of poetry, but it starts by doing what these poets are doing, which is engaging and noticing their world as it occurs to them, very specifically, you know, and as you pointed out, in the body, deeply experienced and deeply felt. And by attending to what we notice and attending to that experience, it then begins to open up into this metaphorical realm. But we don't have to start by thinking up this metaphorical realm. We start with simply what we're noticing and what's really grabbing us and what's really driving our curiosity. So here's another poem by a poet named Wayne Dodd. Another very simple poem, but I think really speaks to where we are currently. It's called Of Rain and Air. And he says, all day I have been closed up inside rooms, speaking of trivial matters. Now at last I have come out into the night, myself a center of darkness. Beneath the clouds, the low sky glows with scattered light. I can hardly think this is happening. Here in this bright absence of day, I feel myself opening out with contentment. All around me, the soft rain is whispering of thousands of feet of air invisible above us. So I reconnected with this poem recently, and I was just so moved by the way that he places the details in this poem up against this idea of contentment. And to me, it feels like a very human experience, a very common human experience that we have as we walk out into nature or go to places that are meaningful to us. We have this sense of suddenly opening out into the space. Particularly now, you know, I think, again, as we are all literally closed up in rooms. So this poem sounded different to me right now than it had in the past. You know, again, I think the invitation of this poem is to seek out that experience and perhaps to use your experiences to then write poetry that that honors those times that you are experiencing that sense of opening up. So another way to talk about what's happening in these poems, Stanley Kunitz, another wonderful American poet, says, one of the great delights of poetry is that when you're really functioning, you're tapping the unconscious in a way that's distinct from the customary use of the mind in daily life. So you're somehow cracking the shell, separating you from the unknown. So that last poem, I think, is a great example of how that's happening. You know, again, I think we're just all invited to use poetry in this way, to access more of life, access more of our what we're capable of perceiving, what we're capable of feeling, and again, that sense of opening out in the last poem. Here's another little poem by a poet who lives in New Mexico and really does a beautiful job of describing these small, intimate moments of noticing. Out of the West. Out of the West, unexpected lyric, a stand of yellow irises rises from the pond muck. 2 horses graze the field, one limping from the fire they fled. Matter and spirit meet, love, argue, wherever you rest your eyes on microscopic midges, horseflies. So this poem takes a bit of a turn in the end, right, where she's sort of naming these larger themes that she's getting at through the imagery that she presented in the beginning of the poem. Nevertheless, I think this poem absolutely follows the pattern that we're seeing of the poet being deeply engaged in the world, in the senses, in simple experience, you know, probably in her backyard. So one last poem I'll share with you all. We'll have a chance to chat a little bit about these poems, and then we'll dive into writing a poem together. So this is by Ada Limon, and another very accessible, wonderful contemporary female poet. I really love this book that she's written called The Carrying. And this poem, well, I'll read it and then we'll talk about it. The last thing. First, there was the blue wing of a scraggly, loud jay tucked into the shrubs. Then the bluish-black moth drunkenly tripping from blade to blade. Then the quiet that came roaring in like the R.J. Corman over Broadway near the RV shop. These are the last 3 things that happened, not in the universe, but here in the basin of my mind, where I'm always making a list for you, recording the day's minor urchins, silvery dust mote, pistachio shell, the dog eating a sugar snap pea. It's going to rain soon. Close clouds floated above us, the air like a net about to release all the caught fishes, a storm siren in the distance. I know you don't always understand, but let me point to the first wet drops landing on the stones, the noise like fingers drumming the skin. I can't help it. I will never get over making everything such a big deal. So just want to open it up for discussion of this or other poems. And really I want to emphasize that there's no right or wrong way to read any of these poems. So what you experience in them and what you feel about them, hopefully you feel a little bit of something. Anything is fair game. You know, as we pointed out earlier, multiple interpretations are the job of poetry. So, so don't be shy to have your own take on things. So just go ahead and unmute if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question about any of these poems that we're looking at. What do you all notice in them?
I'm just noticing that I'm not remembering the poems before this one that we read, but I'm just really curious about that, because what I'm noticing is feeling of being kind of dropped in deeper, kind of below. I know I'm really tired too, and my brain's fried, so that's part of it. But I think it's the it's almost like these invitations to kind of go beneath whatever it is, and that's sort of what and it just feels really good, really good.
Right, like a slowing down, yeah, inviting you into their experience, into the psychology of that moment, and giving you a chance to maybe, if you're like me, I'm also very fried. I've been working, a long day, probably like most of you, and my kids are in the background, and it is a hectic time for many of us, as it normally is. And I think poetry, in these poems in particular, they are very simply, as you said, inviting us into that space of just slowing down and settling, and allowing experience to be what it is, instead of making things happen or reacting, or all the doingness of our lives. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. What about the the subject matter? What catches your attention?
Hey, Radha, this is Elaine. I'll unmute. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hey, good to see you.
How are you?
I'm good.
I feel like this last poem is different than the others, because she so specifically keeps sort of injecting herself into it and saying, these are the last 3 things that happened in my mind. I'm always making a list. There's a lot of I, like she's speaking almost as if she has a very specific audience of 1 maybe that she's talking to. And it's effective, but it's different from the others. And I wonder how you see that, and how that makes it more or less effective for you. Because really the poem is about her making a big deal out of everything, and sort of seeing everything in a bigger way. Does that make sense? I'm not being very articulate.
Yeah, no. This is yeah, fantastic. And I threw this one in here for this very reason, because it's a different voice, it's a different point of view, but she's still using, the ordinary details, the ordinary experience as the basis of this poem. I think to go back to some of the other, there's no I in this previous poem, as there's very little I. The Creely has a bit of an I to it, I was disturbed, or why not? But
sort of less direct, less.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that so stylistically, why do poets choose these 2 different ways of presenting experience? I think in the case where there isn't as much of an I, and not as much of that interpretation factor, then the reader is invited into their own experience a little bit more, into relating directly to what's observed, for example, right? So in this case, Out of the West, we feel that we are in the scene, and we're not having an experience through somebody else.
Yes.
Versus in the Ada Limon case, she's very much there, right? And she wants to be there. And the experience of this poem is really our experience of her experience. So it's, it's a little bit different in how direct it is with that. that end perception, if you will. So I don't know if that helps. I mean, that's maybe a little bit of an academic take on it, but as you all think about the poems that you want to write, know that you have choices in terms of this. You know, you might even write the same poem without an I, you know, just sort of from an observational viewpoint, and then write the same subject matter or same observations into a poem in which you really use a lot of I, and see which works better, you know, see which one expresses what you want to express through the poem.
I also think that her saying, "I know you don't always understand," is such an interesting choice, because that's sort of like, as the reader, you almost feel a little defensive. Like it's very engaging. You feel like you are talking with her, or you're hearing her, and she's someone you know, and it's almost tense a little bit in how she's asking you to understand her experience. Do you find that?
I do. I'd love to hear from other folks what you guys think.
For me, that's actually the line in this poem that like just gets me in the heart. And I think it's more that I feel more identified with her, or like that, like like there's all of this, and I know you don't understand because it's not yeah, you know, it's hard to put into language, sort of the bigness of all of these things that seem so mundane and ordinary. That's where I was with it.
Yeah, great. Other reactions to the Limon poem, or ones that we covered previously? How many of you, just quick show of hands, have read any Ada Limon previously? Oh, great. So a few of you. And how about the previous poets? Were some of them familiar to you? Yes, no? Yeah, great. Okay, good. Well, like I said, there's really there's no right or wrong answer to how we interpret these poems. We each are going to have our own unique experience of what these poems offer to us, but I hope by presenting these together, you get a sense for how very simple the building blocks of poems can be. And again, just go back to that idea of using the practice of poetry during this time to help us connect and really make something beautiful of this time that we have. So, you know, I like to scour various sources for inspiration, and I found this recently in the New York Times about it was from an article called "How Birdwatching Prepared Me for Sheltering in Place." So the author says, "Birds have taught me to love what is small, what is delicate, what is elusive. I've learned that a truth is many details comprising what seems like a unified whole, and I'm more inclined now to immerse myself in the details for their own sake." So I love this idea that we have this opportunity to really pay attention to the details, to slow down and soak in, as you all pointed out. And you know, again, those tiny details are really what make up the best poems, even the most complicated ones. So let's write a poem together. And I like to say we're sketching a poem, not that we're writing a poem, because really to write a poem takes usually lots of drafting and redrafting, and we're not going to go into that part of the process here, but I'd love for you all to walk away with something that feels like it's trending towards a poem or a poem shape. So what I'd like to invite you to do is to go back to the meditation you did earlier on your experience in nature, and imagine that that experience, that object, if you wrote about an object, has a message for you. So again, you know, to go back to that idea of when we enter into what we're noticing, when we sit with even those small details, can we go a little bit deeper and see the meaning that what we're noticing offers us? Working with, you know, what seemed most interesting to you out of your free write. I invite you to draft a short poem. So again, there's no hard and fast rules here. We're not trying to write a metrical or rhymed or particularly technical poem, but just, you know, based on the examples we shared, you might think of one of them that you liked and sort of imitate that voice. And, you know, again, just a opportunity to notice how meditating on simple experiences can really help us express what might be difficult to say otherwise. So what are your observations and your noticings telling you and offering to the reader? So we'll take 10 minutes to do this sketching, and then we'll have a chance to come back together and potentially share some work. So go ahead and wrap it up where you are. And I'd like to invite anyone who would like to share what they've written to please do so.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Eliana, and to my recollection, this is my very, very, very first attempt in ever trying to write any sort of poem, except for maybe in primary school, possibly.
Wonderful.
So this was my daughter's suggestion. So I did manage to think of something at the prompts, and I did manage to write a little something. So
Wonderful.
so I just wrote, it was early morning when I stepped out my front door to the quiet morning light, except for the loud singing of a single solitary morning bird. I searched for the origin, and I spotted him alone at the top of a very large tree, singing very loudly. He seemingly was waiting for a response. It was such a lovely sound to catch my attention in an otherwise quiet morning. He seemed to be in charge. I began to think, I am also in charge as I began my day.
Wonderful. And I like how you brought us into the experience and then brought us into the meaning of it at the end. That was really lovely.
Well, that isn't actually what I thought at the day that happened, but that's how I ended it. I didn't think of myself as in charge that day, but I did think that the bird seemed to be in charge. So today, as I'm writing it, I thought, yeah, I have to take charge of my day.
Yeah,
And that was like my cue.
I love it.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else like to share? You don't have to share the whole thing. You could just share a phrase that you particularly like. Please go ahead.
I'll take a shot. Lie back. Breathe. The invisible that moves me high and low. You will feel the force of your weight heavy, like the force needed to leave the atmosphere. Let me breathe you. The force pressed so heavy it releases you.
Wonderful. And was that an experience that that you had today, or were you reaching back to something?
Well, it was the prompt. Let's see, the first prompt here. Go back to the object that we were writing about earlier. Imagine that object has a message for you. That really did something with me, because my object was just this tree out my window that I had an experience of probably 3 weeks ago. Just the potency of the wind moving the tree. And so when you gave the prompt of the message, like, what is the message for me from the tree, that's what came, these words.
Great, lovely. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else?
I can go. Something new grows in the front yard, skinny and gangly, taller every day. What are you doing here? Where did you come from? Many arms and big pointed oversized leaves. 8 pairs on each fresh green stalk, 7 on some. Dark green in the shade, bright green in the sun, translucent almost. Should be too heavy to hold. Dancing in the breeze, a soft light rustle, I hear or imagine. Leaves and branches flare like one of those air-blown figures outside a used car lot. See me, I am here.
I love how you bring in the wavy thing from the Crolot.
It came up in my, our pre-write thing, and that's the kind of thing usually I'm like, oh, that's like ugly. Like I don't want that in a something I'm creating or whatever. So I sort of forced myself because that's really what it looks like to me.
Yeah, and you probably noticed the Limon poem does that, right? She's referencing sort of that. I'm forgetting the line, but the RV, and yeah, so it has it gives it a very down to earth, authentic feel, and yeah, I love the juxtaposition there. So we have just one more minute, so I guess we should probably wrap up, but does anybody else want to go quickly?
I could go.
Great.
I wrote this about one of my favorite rivers in Norway. A flash in my eye, and she beckons me to sit for a while and watch her reflections of light dancing on the face of the river, revealing all that the sky could hold. I savor this glance, the sparks of the heavens. She shines and all is blue, she shines and all is well. As her golden light moves gracefully across the ambiguous water, holding her glow like a canvas holds paint, until she makes her way to me. The clouds make way for us to meet, the river holds the depths of my anticipation. My face is never as calm as this water, yet the river reminds me to let it all go, to soak up her warmth. I am ever present and ready to greet her. The clouds roll back as I behold her, beaming down from the sky. She shines on me and all is radiant. She shines on me and all is well.
Lovely. Yeah, I love the way that you used refrain in that to sort of bring back the sense of the river, and the image of your face never being as still as or say that line again. It was really beautiful.
My face is never as calm as this water, yet the river reminds me to let it all go.
Yeah, that moment seemed like a really true and important noticing in that experience. So great. Well, I hope you all enjoyed going through this process of sketching a poem together. Just a few closing things from the library. So I want to thank again the Library Foundation for sponsoring this and other events this summer. Just an encouragement to go to the boulderlibrary.org /summer if you're interested in looking at more of the events that are happening. As I said, the class will be posted on the library's YouTube channel, so feel free to go back and revisit it. Might be kind of nice to spend a little bit more time with the poems than we were able to tonight together. And feel free to pass the class on to anyone else who might be interested in it. And if you'd like to stay in touch, please feel free. I can be reached at the email on this slide, and I welcome your comments and feedback. So be well. Thanks again for being here. Lovely to see all you all.